I don't succeed if you don't succeed when you look at the team. Then the question foremost in my mind, as I'm going about trying to pull a team together or to accomplish a mission, is what do they need to be successful? And so that gets to that caring.
People naturally want to do good work if leaders create the right environment for them to thrive. So the science shows when leaders care tangibly, structurally, morale, trust, and productivity all increase. Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore what makes great leaders great, not just in theory, but in practice. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join us on this journey to becoming better leaders. Today, we're going to be talking about a concept that arose during my research and writing of the 4 Stars of Leadership. As I worked through the concept of caring, it became obvious to me there are 2 components to caring. We have to care for our people, and we have to care about our people. It's this idea of caring for our people that we'll be discussing today because it's a misunderstood yet essential element of great leadership. To help me walk through this, I'm honored to have retired U.S. Air Force General Ellen Pawlikowski. General Pawlikowski is one of our nation's most accomplished leaders. She's a 4-star general who holds a Ph.D. in chemical engineering and is former commander of Air Force Materiel Command, where she led over 80,000 and oversaw research, acquisition, and sustainment for the entire Air Force enterprise. General, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for your service to our nation.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tom. Thank you for the invitation.
General Pawlikowski, when we hear people say, caring for your people, I imagine that a lot of us think that it means something soft. It means something sentimental or overly protective. And I'm curious how you, as someone who oversaw Air Materiel Command, think about caring for the people you lead.
Well, Tom, first, I'd like to take just about a minute or two to describe my leadership model that I use and formulate and teach others about, and how that concept of caring for your people fits into that. My model is actually is the 4 C's, although frankly, one of the C's isn't caring because it is actually integrated into at least 2, if not 3 of the 4 C's. The first C of leadership that I like to talk about is courage. And that's the courage to step out and do something when maybe those around you are not sure about it. And this is a model, by the way, that can be used when you're with a group of friends in high school and you're all deciding what to do for the weekend, or it can be when you're in the middle of a crisis, leading a team of airmen or soldiers. And the second C then is competence. And competence meaning you know what you're doing, you understand what your team is capable of doing. And that's important because courage without competence is foolishness. You can end up running into things where if you don't know what you're doing. And there's an element of caring in that, caring for the fact that the team has to be competent, has to have the skills that it needs to be able to accomplish the mission. The third C is one that's very directly related to caring about your people, and that is commitment. You need to demonstrate that you are committed to the path that you're taking. And this is very important in terms of the team because leadership and a team is all about trust and trust among each other. And so if your team does not believe that you're committed, that you're going to be there with them, then they're not going to be as sure that they're going to be committed to whatever effort it is you're trying to achieve. And then the last one, which is definitely directly connected to the concept of care and leadership, is compassion. And that means that they may do what you tell them to do, and they don't understand, but at some point, if you don't demonstrate that you care about them, then they can reach a point where all the other things in their life, which all of us have different things that are important to us. Our job is important to us, the mission of the Air Force is important to us, but we also care about other things. And if you as a leader don't demonstrate to those that you're leading that you care about that part about them too, that you understand that there are other aspects of their life. And that's what I frame the compassion. So you can see in at least 3 of those, and even to a degree in that courage one, there's the concept of care for the individuals, and their ability to succeed is integrated into each of those at least 3 of those 4 C's that I talked about.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective on this. It's fascinating. So in the work that I did with 51 4 stars, and our listeners have heard me say this uncounted times, but the 4 C's that I derived were character, competence, caring, and communication. So it's fascinating that we have a similarity across frameworks in that regard. But thanks for sharing that. I think as I think about this idea, and I differentiated it a moment ago, there's the caring for and the caring about, right? And how I kind of have come to see it is caring for is this idea of making sure everybody has what they need. You're caring for their needs in a sense with regard to accomplishing their role in the mission, right? Like they've got the the software. Okay, they're not operating Windows NT or something like that. They're up to date on whatever software, whatever systems that they need to accomplish the mission. They're getting the sleep that they need. They have, protection from the elements, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's caring about, which is who are they, where are they from, what are their goals, those sorts of things. And so as I think about this kind of concept of caring for the people that we lead, that's how I kind of frame it. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that the caring for part is an integral part of, in my view, of being able to accomplish the mission. In my experience, as an Air Force leader, you're not going to find people in the organization that don't want the organization to succeed. Right? I mean, that's a bottom line. And if they have people that don't want the organization to succeed, then it's your responsibility as a leader to maybe suggest that they seek a different approach to things, right? Like maybe a different job. And so if you look at your job, I don't succeed if you don't succeed when you look at the team. Then the question foremost in my mind, as I'm going about trying to pull a team together or to accomplish a mission, is what do they need to be successful? And so that gets to that hearing. And the end result of that is, frankly, improved productivity, better morale, all of which are critically important to the success of the mission. So you can't separate mission success from that caring for that you talk about, because without those things, it just doesn't work. And I can give you an example
Sure, that'd be great.
of one particular time when I was the Air Force Materiel Command commander, and the Air Force was going through all of these efforts to figure out how we could improve our simple things like email and communication, because we had very aging infrastructure, and there was a great deal of frustration and discussion, even at the four-star level, about how do we go about doing this. There was this view that one size would fit all, and so every base would have this amount of structure. And me, as the Air Force Materiel Command commander, I had 80,000 people, but 60,000 of them were civilians, and we were doing the sustainment and the research and development, which is a little different mission when you think about it than a flying base. And so I tried to highlight to them that in some ways we needed better computers. We needed bigger pipes in order to do this. And I wasn't getting very far, because it was like, okay, Ellen, we hear you. You're worried about the civilians. We're worried about the airmen. And for me, the two are the same. And I was at a meeting. It was like the 27th of September, and we were all in Washington D.C. together. And I get a call from my chief of staff back in Dayton saying, "Hey, we got a real problem. Majority of the funding that actually gets spent by the Air Force, a lot of it goes through Air Force Materiel Command. I mean, we spent $60 billion a year. And at the end of the year, you are trying to get money through on contracts in order to get the money out so that we get it spent by the end of the year." And the call is, we're just having all sorts of problems with our IT. And so we are going to not allow certain people to use their computers and to go through communication, because we can't get, we're having trouble. The pipes are too small. So I went to the chief of staff of the Air Force and I said, "Boss, look, my people can't do their job. And I just want you to be aware that we could end up leaving money unspent, and therefore we would not be able to get those things that we were trying to buy that the Air Force needed, because my computer infrastructure is not working for us. And I've got people that are working, 12, 14, 16 hours a day just to try to get this going." And at which point he turned to the person responsible for comm and communication, says, "We need to get this fixed, and we need to get it fixed quickly." But there's an example of, people are trying to get the mission done. And, you can say, "Oh, we don't need, who cares whether you need computers? Who cares if you, have a limit on your inbox for how many emails you can get?" But in this case, giving the people the ability to get the mission done was the difference between success of the mission and not. And so it kind of brings to the point of, and we may talk about this later, of understanding what it is your people need. It isn't always obvious until, and you don't want to learn about what they need in a crisis situation, which is where we were then, right? We only had 3 more days to spend this money, to get this money out, and the pipes were too small to
Yeah.
get the data through.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it really brings this idea to life. It also highlights a number of really valuable leadership principles: knowing your people, having the competence to understand what is needed to get the job done. Also, I think that it really hits on the idea that caring for people, caring for the people that we're leading, is really about being, can we say, the chief obstacle remover? I mean, the
Hmm.
job is to actually, whether it's they're not trained well, okay, how do I get them trained? They don't have the equipment that they need. How do we get them the equipment? Whatever the obstacle is that prevents them from achieving their component in the mission. I think if my people are fighting against the system instead of focusing on their job or the mission overall, then I'm not doing my job as a leader.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And the communication part, which was one of your C's, is integral to this. And communication is a two-way street. You have to listen and you have to be able to communicate. We've often talk about commander's intent in the military and on the industry side, now that I'm working on corporate boards, it's the tone from the top, right? And understanding, but by the same token, you've got to be able to listen. You've got to be able to understand where people are and what are the real stumbling blocks. Because you may not think about it, you may not realize, which gets back to my competency. Competence is not you being the expert at everything. Competence is about you relying and understanding where the knowledge and the expertise is in your team to get it done and to listen. Very important skill.
Absolutely. So many people in society would be in better shape if we listened more than we speak. Let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The Four Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes& Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Now that we've solidified what it looks like to care for the people we're leading, and we've hit on this a little bit, but just to kind of explore a little bit more, why is this idea so important for great leadership?
Well, I think it's important for great leadership because, in my mind, when you're talking about leadership, it's all about creating the environment and the conditions that allows the team to succeed. As I always would say, I don't succeed if you don't succeed. And as a leader, your focus is not about you. Your focus is about the team being able to succeed. And the only way you can do that, your primary responsibility is to create the conditions that allows everyone on the team to contribute to the best of their ability. And so that's the denominator, is that ability. And what can you do to improve that their ability to succeed?
Exactly. I think if and the thing that I think that gets into what you're just saying, that gets to this whole point of caring for and you hit on everybody on your team.
Mhm.
If if we're not caring for all those people, then there are certain people who are gonna be less capable. I was gonna say weaker, but less capable in whatever domain it is, and that represents a threat, a weakness to your whole team. You're only as they say, chain's only as strong as its weakest link, and so as a leader, we're looking at those links and making sure that they're all as strong as they can be, and that's caring for, I think, those people, those links, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I can imagine in a world that's continuously accelerating, is filled with volatility and uncertainty, there are probably people out there who would say, I don't really have time to worry about rest or computer systems or all this sort of stuff. We have missions to complete or, goals to reach or sales to hit or whatever it may be. How would you respond to those people?
Well, I think it comes down to this, the mission isn't going to get accomplished if the people don't have the tools to get it done. And often, I appreciated listening to this flow about fix my computer on the Air Force. I was on LinkedIn, a whole bunch of social media where people were frustrated about it. And I used to always tell people, hey, well, the example I just gave you about the end of the year, but we'll commit to spending billions of dollars on the F-35, but not a couple $1,000s to give the contracting officer that's trying to put the contract in place a computer that doesn't keep crashing and can't upload the latest software. So you have to appreciate, as a leader, part of that competence is an understanding of how the individual pieces contribute to the whole. One of those small pieces could be that Achilles heel, that for lack of this one thing that this individual can't do, the mission fails. And you want to eliminate as many as just really taking this as a mission perspective. Your objective is to eliminate all single point failures. You want everyone to be able to achieve and accomplish. And I think, example of this that I think about was I was had the opportunity to work in the launch business back when I was out at Los Angeles. And the space launch business is one of the most risk averse businesses that are around, because you put up that time, we were launching $1 billion satellites, and the most dangerous time in a satellite's life is when it's on the launch vehicle. And so there is a great deal of effort going in to making sure that everything is perfect. But at one point, we had a launch where we were unable to clear the launch because there was a laptop that had not been updated and it failed to, they weren't able to do the last check to say, yes, this particular subsystem is ready to go. And we had to cancel the launch for that day. And the cost, just purely the cost associated with that. In the launch business, there's other examples too of where, this is not so much about the caring for people, but it's the point about how important the little things are. The last Milstar satellite we were supposed to launch in 1999, someone had mistakenly put in metrics units instead of English units, and the satellite launched into a radiation belt and never got to orbit. And it took us 7 years to build a new satellite to replace that one. Now, if you think about it, I would like to make sure that I enable the engineers that are doing that to not make that mistake, right? And think about what could I easily do to ensure that that mistake doesn't happen again, right? And everybody is focused on succeeding. Nobody wants that launch to fail, right? And so it's not for a lack of attention to details. I mean, it may have been the stress of the minute. It's hard to tell, but when you're talking about success of a launch, everybody's focused on, okay, is the rocket ready? Is this piece of hardware ready? Is that working? Well, do we have the right tools for the engineers that are helping to make the decisions? I mean, it's got to be part of it.
There's so much that goes into that, right? I'm just thinking about Challenger and the O-rings and the
Hmm.
communication, just like listening to the people who know, also in that. And the idea that with regard to the Milstar satellite, that's not the first time that that's happened. It's happened since then where there was an issue with the unit of measure and that it ended up way off trajectory and, billion plus who knows how much that cost for that one little mistake. One thing I think is funny as we're talking about these issues with software and all that, for the listeners, we actually got started with the podcast just a little late because we both had to update our computers. So it's rather kind of ironic that now we're talking about this and we were having our own problems
Yes, the
updating.
success of your podcast is dependent on
Right,
the two of
exactly.
us being IT experts, which we may not necessarily be, right?
Yes, yes, I claim no expertise to that end. So one thing, getting back to this idea of caring for people, one thing that I've seen in multiple professional spheres is a lack of recognition, especially by those at the top of organizations, that mission success depends on people, and people can't perform well when they're under-resourced, overworked, or ignored. And I've seen units where leaders ignored small problems. Again, just getting to this idea of computers and updating and all that sort of stuff. And it has led, just like you've shared, with so many major, like legitimate failures of the accomplishment of the organization, of the people, or so forth. But I've also seen where when leaders invest in the basics, the tools, as we talked about, rest, communication that we've hit on. The other thing is training. You know, we also have to think that our people need tools, but our people are also within the system a tools to accomplish the mission. And if they're not trained, then that's on us. But when we do all those things, when we hit all those small points, then performance just skyrockets. I'm curious how this sort of lands with you, but that caring for our people was preventative maintenance for the human system.
Yeah, yeah, it is important, and an aspect that we haven't talked about yet, which is really captured in my last C, the compassion C. We're all humans, and we go to work every day. We all want, as I said, we want to succeed. We want to do that. But if there's things going on in our life that are distractions to accomplishing the mission, but they're important to us. I'll give you an example. When I had a situation when I was a young captain where my child care arrangement wasn't working out. My daughter had an allergy to milk, and she was in a child care organization, and they were unsuccessful at times of preventing because she was a toddler, and she would get she'd get somebody else's milk or it would spill. Well, when I'm sitting in the office trying to accomplish my job, I am distracted by this because I'm as much a mother as I am an airman, and frankly, a father for my husband and for others. And so when you talk about that optimum performance, a key part of it is not just the tools, not just the training, but it's an understanding that there are other things that go on in people's lives, and it's as equal part of it. So when you go about looking at okay, what's our plan to go forward, you have got to consider to give them, it's not just rest, but it's time to deal with those things. And thinking about that before you're in a crunch is an important part of about being a leader. So when you get to that point where everybody's got to go all in, you have demonstrated to your people you understand that there are other things going on in their life. And that's not being soft. That's being realistic that I am not going to get optimum performance from you if you're sitting there worried about whether your kid is crawling through milk and you're going to get a call to have to take her to the hospital to because she's broken out into hives. Right? I mean,
Right.
it's just fundamentally part of it. Or, if you've got somebody who has some elder adults, which for many of us in our generation is one of those things that you have to think about. So part of it is communicating a trust to your people that you understand that they are a whole person and that there are times when they need to trust that if they come to you and say, hey, I've got to go work through this, and you have the ability in your team to say, okay, go, we'll see you tomorrow, whatever. And understanding, because that person, when they're able to fix that, to address that, when they come back, they're going to give you 120%, 130%, because they understand that you care about not just the mission, but that you care about them. So it's not just about those things that directly affect the mission. It's those second order things, if you will, that allow people to come to work and to do their job with their attention being where it needs to be at that time and not somewhere else. Because that's when those mistakes, like putting the wrong units in, come in, is when people are not focused on what it is they need to do. And that's just equally important as all these other things, Tom. It's just critically important.
Absolutely. I agree completely with that. I think it's to some degree, it's being just, I think, good humans. If right, like, hey, these are people, they're not automatons. And I think that woe unto the leader or the person in the leadership position who just sees the people that they're tasked with leading as somebody that can plug and play, and doesn't take the time to care about them, who they are, what they're going through, those sorts of things. Because as you say, when you extend that trust to your people, you say, hey, I see you, I understand your situation, and I trust that you're going to get the job done whenever, this moment is taken care of, they will return and they'll be committed to the team, the mission, in a way that they wouldn't have been before. And there's plenty of research, especially within the domain of medicine, that looks at burnout and engagement and all this sort of thing, and that people spend so much time thinking, when they're not given the opportunity to address those things, they spend so much cognitive energy thinking about it that they become far less productive. So
Hmm.
that even though somebody who's out there just wanting to count beans, I say they're here, they're supposed to be, generating whatever per hour, they're not getting that productivity because a lot of their cognitive energy is somewhere else. So if they had time to actually go and address that, just as you say, they'd come back so much more productive.
Yeah, and I think a key part of that too, Tom, that gets into the caring for people is to do the best you can to manage the intensity. When you're going through and you're trying to solve a problem, the business that I'm in, where we're trying to develop a new technology, something that's never been done before. And of course, you've got a schedule, and it's the first challenge you have as a leader is that you can't time invention. So, but your leadership wants to know when are you going to be done, and so. You're running behind, and there's a series of milestones you're trying to get, and you get the team focused on, okay, we've got to get this done. You know that not only do we have to get this done, but we have to get the next 7 steps after that. And so the team will run and they will get to there, and the initial reaction in a mission-focused leadership perspective is, "Okay, let's turn and let's get our attention on this next one." And you think, no time to waste, let's just keep going. And one of the things that I learned in my career, and this was I had my most challenging program was a program called the Airborne Laser, where we were putting a high energy laser on a 747 to shoot down Scud missiles. Literally, people talked about it as science fiction. And we were trying to get the laser to work, and we had all sorts of issues. We were, 3 months behind, 4 months behind, and then they finally broke through and they were able to get this piece working, which they had spent like 6 months intensely. And okay, that piece is done. Now we got to do the next one. But I stopped and I said, okay, look. And we had a regular update. And I called the team lead up and I handed him a bottle of champagne. And I said, congratulations, you got this done. And then we got in and we all clapped for him. And he came up to me later and he goes, you don't know how much that meant to the team. Because obviously they were feeling the intensity, but just those little things that you can do as a leader to tell people that you care about the effort that they put in. So we lost a few hours, right? Because we celebrated with a bottle of champagne and other things, but then that ability to refresh and to reiterate to the team how important they are to the mission is just critical in leadership, and that's all about caring. That's all about caring. But what that adds to the mission is just absolutely essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take a quick science break here. I want to share that with listeners that research really supports exactly what we're talking about. In 2010, Kellaway and Barling published their study in the journal Work and Stress, and they show that leaders who demonstrate concern for employee well-being, which we hit on just a minute ago, significantly reduce burnout and absenteeism, which results in greater performance and accomplishment of organizational goals. There was a 2016 study in the Leadership Quarterly by Owens and Heckman that found humble servant-oriented leadership improves both employee engagement and team performance, fostering psychological safety. And then McGregor's classic theory, why, reminds us that people naturally want to do good work if leaders create the right environment for them to thrive. So the science shows when leaders care tangibly, structurally, morale, trust, and productivity all increase.
Yeah, you really hit on, I think, which is one of the key words in there, and is the trust. There is so much that can be accomplished in a team that trusts each other, and so little that can get accomplished in a team that doesn't, that where the trust doesn't exist. Frankly, not to get political, but we're seeing that within our Congress right now.
That's
The
exactly where I
lack of
went.
trust, the lack of trust is undermining the ability of the Congress to be effective in leading the country because they don't trust each other. And as a leader, it's a cornerstone is to establish that trust. And caring for the people, caring for the mission is essential to us to trust among the team. So very much my experience reinforces what these studies have demonstrated.
That's exactly where my mind went too, was with this idea of trust. There are a number of good books out there for listeners. I've referenced Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust before. It's a good one that you may want to check out. So, well, John Polakowski, let's get practical here. How can leaders, whether they're running a hospital, a company, a squadron, start practicing this kind of care?
Well, I think, you're one of your C's is I think the cornerstone of this is communicate, 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 and that means listening too. As a young officer, when you've got a team of about five or six folks, then you can have a personal engagement with everybody. And so that is in ways somewhat easier than when, you've got an organization of 80,000 people where you can't possibly be able to communicate. But what you need to do there is you need to ensure that you are communicating with that next level down. You've got to make sure people understand, and you have to listen. And nowadays, listening can take many different forms. You can listen to the people around you, but our Gen Z, even our millennials, they have ways of communicating to us in ways that we don't completely, we aren't completely used to. And I don't mean this as trying to track them to see if they're saying anything wrong, but you need to stay in touch with what's going on in different social media and Substacks. And not that you need to spend all your time in there, but that's often how people will communicate. I laugh about sometimes you think you understand how your organization and what's important to them, and then you find out later that you've actually missed the mark. With that same program that I talked about, the Airborne Laser. Now this was back in the early 2000s, so we weren't as in communication wasn't done so much by social media, but let's just say email. And we were in this old dilapidated building. And this team had developed this culture under my previous leadership. It's us against the world, and we can get through everything. And so there was this old building is not a problem. And then we had an issue where we actually had a storm in which part of the building actually came down. And we ended up, so the people sent out, my facilities people sent out a note saying, "Hey, this is happening. Just be aware of it." And for the next 2 hours, this stream of responses to this email came out about all these examples of other things, like the bat in the on the third floor. And I looked at this and I said, this whole ethos about us against the world, this building is an issue for these people, and I didn't know about it because I had really not had not listened to. I just the most vocal people were like, "Hey, we can handle anything." And at that point, I actually went to my boss and said, "Hey, I need to spend some money to move us out of this building." And he's like, "You're absolutely right. That place is a death trap. We need to get people out of it." And so, he was also a good listener, right? But there's an example of you can't communicate by just one means. You've got to use every form of communication, and you have to provide venues for people to listen, for you to be able to listen to what people are saying. You're not always going to make everybody happy. That's for sure. But that, I think, in my mind, is the thing you have to do is have your pulse on the organization. Do the surveys. You'd be surprised at how often people are amazed at what they find out in these surveys that are issues that they never even realized. But that gets back to building a structure where there's trust there. If people don't trust that you're going to act on something, or they're suspicious that you're going to penalize them if they speak up about something that's an issue. So that open communication and that trust are the two keys in my mind from that perspective.
I don't know that you got communicate, communicate, communicate from who I'm about to reference, but I have to believe that you all overlapped some in your career. But when I interviewed General Les Lyles
Oh yeah,
for my study, I asked him, "What are the 3 most important leadership lessons you learned throughout your career?" And he said, "Communicate, communicate, communicate." So anyway,
yeah. Les is a good friend and a mentor for many many years. Great guy,
he's a
great American.
spectacular person. I really appreciate him greatly. So those are 2 really great, concepts, trust and communication. As I thought about our conversation, when it was coming up, I was trying to come up with how would I go about doing this in a practical way that people can understand. I came up with 3 questions that I think can help us know how to better care for the people we're leading. And so number 1 is to ask, "Do you have what you need to perform at your best?" And then listen to the answer. Number 2 is, "What's getting in your way of performing at your best?" And then the third one that I came up with is, "What is one thing I can do to make your job easier?" The caveat here, and we've said this on this podcast before, is if you ask and they tell you something, A, you gotta listen. You gotta actually care about the answer, but then you have to be willing to act on it.
Those questions are good, but one of the things that I experienced, it gets back to that competence. That one is the next thing is to really understand, get to understand what is it that you're trying to do. You know, do you have what you need to perform at your best? Well, what is it you're trying to do? And because it may be that there's competence elsewhere in the team that can help them to do that job easier and more effectively, but they haven't had the opportunity to get exposed to it. So I'll give you, a very specific example. Very sad start to this was, I know if you remember a few years ago, we had a former airman that had gone to create some very serious, several deaths in a church in Texas. And in the process of investigating this incident, they found that the airman had had a reportable violent crime, and the Air Force had failed to submit it into the national database, and he was then able to get a weapon when he should not have been able to get the weapon. And we discovered when we did this that we probably had maybe several more of these type of incidents. We didn't know. We had all paperwork for all of these convictions from around the Air Force, but we didn't. And so we had to go figure out how we were going to. We were tasked as well as the other services to go back and check to see if we missed anybody else. And so the security forces was part off center was part of Air Force Materiel Command. And so they came to me and they said, "Okay, here's our plan for doing this. We're going to take 10 of our senior NCOs in the Air Force and send them down there to sift through this paperwork in tranches of 6 weeks. And we're going to get this done in about a year and a half." It's the typical brute force way. We're going to take the tools we have, and the best tool we have is really smart NCOs who, can get through this quickly. And just a couple of hours before that, I'd gotten a presentation from what was our now called the Rapid Sustainment Office, which was trying to look at using tools to improve the speed and the cost of fixing airplanes. And they had showed me that they had contract with this company for what we would now call an AI tool to take unstructured data, meaning just data that was basically scans, PDF files, and go through it and be able to use that to look for trends in what was breaking on our airplanes. And all the data that we had was paper again, that from the maintenance one. So I listened to him and I said, "Okay, so what are you trying to do?" We're trying to figure out, we're trying to identify in all these pieces of paper whether we've missed this. And I said, "So it's a couple of key words that you're looking for, right?" He goes, "Yeah, that's what they're going to look for." And so I then said, "Okay, hold on." And I called up the lady that had come in and I said, "Look, you got any room on your contract? I mean, because I think I've got another." And we sent them down there, and they took about a week because they had to scan in all this paper, and then they had to train. Just as we talk
Mhm.
about AI, they had to train the tool, and we got through all the data in 2 weeks. And so there's an example. First of all, they were skeptical about this. Oh, well, yeah, is this really going to work? And then as I got into it, and now that is a tool that they have to do other things. And so there's an example where by listening, and my job as a leader is to make those connections, to leverage the competence that I have somewhere else to do that. And that was all because I'm like, oh, yes, I wanted to get the job done, but to think that we were going to send these guys down there to sit there for, 8 to 10 hours a day just going through paper. Can't we do this in an easier way? and still leverage their expertise because they were part of training the tool, right? They had to
Sure.
be there to train the tool. So there's an example in my mind that I probably would add a fourth question on for there is what is it you're really trying to do? And do I potentially have expertise, competence elsewhere that can enable you to do that easier?
Yeah, that's a great additional question. So we'll definitely tack that on there. Well, General, before we close out our conversation, I have one final question for you. If you could go back to your younger self and give that young airman one bit of leadership advice, what would it be?
Well, for me, it goes back to my four C's. Regardless of whether you're a leader of one yourself, you've got to have the courage to step out and do something when maybe others are hesitant to know what to do, because it's often that's that first step that others will follow because they don't have the courage to do it. The second is be good at what you're asked to do and understand the mission. Getting to that point that I talked about earlier about where can I leverage, understand the mission and where I can do my job really well and how can I help elsewhere in doing that? And the third is be committed and demonstrate to everyone around you that you're committed. You've got to be committed. And then finally, show compassion to others. It was probably 20 years into my career before I formulated that model, but it's what I followed, and I followed in my personal life too.
Well, it's great admonition. Great way to close out our conversation. General Pawlikowski, it really has been an honor to get to talk with you and for you to share your wisdom with us. Uh, you've shown us that caring for our people isn't sentimental or soft, but really strategic about equipping our people to win. And whether that's in the office, the assembly line, or the cockpit, and I really greatly appreciate having you on. It's been a privilege to speak with you. Thank you for being on the Science of Leadership with us.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Tom. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.